Now we turn to the southern hemisphere, where COVID-19 was slow to hit Latin America, but the number of confirmed cases escalated sharply in March. The first case was confirmed in Brazil on February the 26th. A month later, Brazil leads the region with over 4,200 cases by Sunday. Chile and Ecuador respectively saw more than 1,500 cases. More than a third of Latin America's population lives in poverty. The region is also struggling with social unrest, economic slowdown, a dengue epidemic, and vulnerable healthcare systems. Government responses to the pandemic ranges from swift action to caution to downplaying the risk. How prepared is Latin America for the virus, and what is the international community doing to help? Joining me from Sao Paulo, Brazil, is Professor Marcos Vinicius De Freitas, visiting professor at China Foreign Affairs University, also a senior fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, a think tank based in Morocco. But I think what I was seeing just now is actually via Skype by Reinaldo Ma, partner at Brazilian law firm CGTN Freire, also director of the China-Brazil Business Council. So, Mr. Ma, thank you very much for joining us, and Professor Marcos Vinicius De Freitas, thank you very much for joining us. So, as I said, 3 weeks ago, when the first cases were appearing in Latin America, no Latin American countries had more than 25 cases. Now COVID-19 has reached every single country in the region, and more than a dozen countries have over 100 cases. Professor De Freitas, are you alarmed by the pace of the spread, and how worried should we be about a full-on outbreak in Latin America?
I think the greatest challenge that this COVID crisis presents to Latin America is the fact of how ill-prepared the region is for situations like this. What you have realized is that the region has suffered economically for a few years. You know, we had the economic distress of 2007, but now with the, you start noticing a collapse in the economy of the region, and this collapse will automatically reflect in the governments. So what you have seen in Latin America, and that's the concern I have, is that coronavirus should be treated as a health issue, and it should be cared as a health issue, but it has become in many countries a political factor of stress. And that's the challenge that we see. The countries are not prepared. They lack in the healthcare infrastructure to deal with all the problems related to coronavirus. And not only that, we have a political clash, and that political clash is really what is disturbing, and I think could create even more negative results.
Okay. I'm also joined on the phone from Nanchang, southern China, by Peiran Shi, Assistant Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences Institute of Latin American Studies. But I want to go to Mr. Ma here. What is your assessment of the level of preparedness in Latin America for the onslaught of COVID-19? Do you also see the kind of health issue being complicated or turned into a political issue that's making it even more difficult for governments to deal with this challenge?
Thanks for having me here. I think that Brazil is trying to build up its structure. We have a health system which is not sufficient to cope with that, with the regular needs of the population, let alone with one of these, the coronavirus issue. We have political issues, we have discussions. I think that's it's going on in all the countries in Latin America. But in the general term, I think it's still a line. I think the population is getting aware of that and is trying to quarantine itself, isolate itself to reduce the impact. In Latin America, we tend to believe that because we are in a tropical area, most of the countries are in tropical areas, we are less prone to respiratory diseases. And that's created a stigma in the population that we shouldn't worry, and I think that come down very quickly. I think everyone realizes this is a really serious issue, and people are trying to take their actions by their own, or the governments. There are political discussion, but I think in general terms, the population is aware of the risks and is trying to stay as much as they can isolated to prevent, the increase of the spread of the virus.
Peiran Shi, what is your assessment observing from China the situation in Latin America? Do you see signs that probably they will have the luck of seeing the curve flatten, or do you think they really risk going, the pattern of Wuhan or Italy?
Well, from my point of view, I wouldn't be very optimistic about Latin America's future, because it is true that so far Latin American statistics do not look so bad or so dangerous as the case of Italy, for instance. But one of the possible reasons is that Latin American countries so far do not run sufficient tests, as the medical resources are quite limited in a lot of countries. So if this is really the case, I think we would expect the number will increase dramatically as soon as these countries get sufficient testing kits, for instance.
Well, let's take a look at a graphic prepared by the International Monetary Fund on March the 18th. That's almost 2 weeks ago, and that chart shows the calculations on the preparedness of the Americas, and we can see green indicates that these regions are most prepared or better prepared, and then red is less, and the yellow ones are even poorly, even less prepared. So we're seeing North America, Canada, the United States is considered to be the most well-prepared regions to fight COVID-19, and then the great majority of countries in Latin America. But as we are seeing now, what is happening in the United States, for instance, clearly they were not well enough prepared to tackle this pandemic. So Professor De Freitas, given even the United States is grappling with this problem at this moment, especially in New York, for instance, how much worse do you think this is going to get for Latin America, where the level of preparedness in the medical systems, local medical systems, are even worse?
I think it can get complicated because of...
Yes, go ahead, please. Professor De Freitas, do you hear me? Okay, Mr. Ma, did you hear my question just now? What will be your comment?
Yes, I heard that,
yeah.
And I think the graphics on the IMF actually shows the reality of the economic development. U.S. and Canada are developed nations, whether they're pretty much the rest of Latin America are developing emerging markets, and they're not fully developed. And that causes a lot of impacts, not only in the economic and social area. One of the examples we might tell is like the infrastructure, particularly sanitation infrastructure. If you are in the U.S. or in Canada, regardless of how poor you are, you have running water and sewage treatment. While in the rest of Latin America, that's not true for the full population. And that can be a big issue, can increase the spread. I mean, some of the cities, they say, we are hearing is that people are telling us to wash our hands. We don't even have water. How do we wash our hands? So that might happen in a lot of communities around Latin America, and that might really increase the spread of the virus. That's really worrisome, and that we might have a potentialized case in Latin America.
Before I go into, how worried some people are, including me, about the prospect in Latin America or in the global south in general, there's another graphics on the demographics in Latin America, and that's according to the Global News Media Organization in Canada, which indicates that the demographics in Latin America is actually slightly tilted to the advantage of Latin America, because they have only less than 9% of its population who are aged 65 and above. However, if you look at the per capita healthcare expenditure, Latin America is only a fraction of that of North America or European Union. And then, however, the number of physicians per 1,000 people, Latin America is doing not so bad. It's almost as high as North America, and it's higher than East Asia and Pacific. So, Shi Peiran, let me go to you. Given the mixed demographic or physician per 1,000 ratio, per 1,000 people ratio, what kind of mixed picture are we looking in the prospects of the ability of Latin America to deal with this potential crisis?
Well, I think on the one hand, it's good news because large amounts of younger population in general mean that you are less likely to die, because we all know that elder people report much higher mortality rates in the cases around the world. But on the other hand, it will also be more difficult for younger people to stay at home and self-quarantine, because younger people will have like stronger motivations to go outside because they are also the main workforce of the family.
Right.
So in this sense, the result is quite mixture, I have to say.
Yeah. Professor De Freitas, if you can, what kind of mixed challenges are we looking at for Latin America? How worried are you about a real disaster situation unfolding in Latin America, like what we have seen in Western Europe, like what we are seeing in New York at this moment?
I think we have a positive thing, which is the demographic bonus, and also the situation, with the weather and things are a little bit more different. My concern is that the economic situation in the region has affected the healthcare system, and it may become even more disturbing with all the results, the negative results that we're going to see from the shutdown now and the lockdown. So the situation becomes a concern for us in the sense that we are looking into trying to implement measures, and I do see a general spirit of cooperation in the sense that we need to win the fight against the virus. But the only concern that we have is that we may not be able to do it if we are not preparing our health system and our hospitals for this. So what I see is that the greatest challenge that we can observe is that the governments really need to ramp up their health systems. And the challenge that you have is that, Latin America goes from very wealthy countries, wealthy countries like Brazil that is facing problems. And you even mentioned, if the U.S. has problems, right, what can we see in other places like El Salvador and other countries that do not have access to so many resources? So what we see is that in that sense, the region will need foreign cooperation, will need external help to address many of these issues, particularly when it comes to hospitals and getting the necessary equipment for them to do well during the crisis.
Do you think the regional governments are doing enough, though? I mean, from the kind of hesitation, let's say, if not reluctance, from some regional governments in terms of doing more to help save lives instead of prioritizing the economy at this moment. Professor De Freitas, do you think the regional governments are doing enough? International help must come, I admit, but regionally, are they doing enough?
I think that the challenge there is that, and we have this conflict between saving lives or saving the economy, and I understand that this is a very difficult dilemma. It's like a Sophia dilemma here that you have between these two. The problem is that the economic deterioration in the region and the recession that we have seen has created like a negative, it has eaten out the capability for the region to really be able to answer in an effective way.
Okay.
To the demands and to the issues concerning the virus.
Let me bring in Mr. Ma very briefly. What is your take on the situation? Do you believe that the virus really needs to be the priority, or do you think there has to be some kind of economic activity going on at a maximum level as much as possible?
I think we need to always look at maintaining the health issue containing the virus. I mean, saving life is the biggest priority. Obviously, there's a level in how this will go, how long this will go, and how long we can keep isolated. I think this is the dilemma that's going through a lot of the governments, including local governments. But definitely, life is ahead of everything.
Running out of time, again, a very big issue, and I would hate to see things go out of control in Latin America. People need to do more inside the region and with other parts of the world as well. Many thanks to my guests, Reinaldo Ma and Professor Marcos Vinicius De Freitas and Peiran Shi. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Thanks for watching. You've got the point.